Hey guys, welcome to the Darshan Talks recording and podcast. On this podcast, we discuss life science, legal, and regulatory issues, especially in the context of medical affairs, clinical research, and promotional compliance. If you like these videos and podcasts, please like, leave a comment, and subscribe. You know you want to. This video and podcast is brought to you by the Kulkarni Law Firm. Reach out to the Kulkarni Law Firm for advice on PRC review, MRC review, developing SOPs, training, audit compliance, and more. Reach out to Darshan at kulkarnilawfirm.com or call me at 302-252-6959. Or you can just visit our website at darshantalks.com or visit the law firm website at kulkarnilawfirm.com. That's KULKARNI lawfirm.com. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Darshan Talks. I have with me the one, the only Parker Nolen, and I know he's the one, the only because I've had a brief chance to talk to him, and he is loads of fun. So I'm actually excited to talk about the topic that everyone's been craving to hear about. There were seats that were booked up. I think we tried to book a stadium, but they said that it's just too small. But we finally have we have a topic that we think we can get Parker involved in. But before we get started, Parker, you want to tell, well, I should probably specify. The topic is, how do you start an IRB? But Parker, before we get started, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Parker Nolen. I am the Vice President of IRB Services and Consulting for a brand new CRO in Miami called Cetero. And I have been in this field for over 2 decades. So when it comes to IRB stuff, I know it backwards and forwards. In fact, I have rightfully earned the nickname Sheldon.
And do you want to demonstrate how you've earned that nickname?
Well, yeah, I actually, for Christmas one year, I was at a hospital system in Indiana, and my team gave me this without any explanation, without any cards. They just said, "Merry Christmas." And I just looked at them and I'm like, well, that's a compliment, right? And so ever since then, I've been known as Sheldon. There you go. I mean, it probably has to do with the fact I can spout the regulations in my sleep backwards and forwards, cite them chapter and verse, and that makes people's eyes glaze over, which actually works to my advantage sometimes, just saying.
Good to know. So there's a saying in the law that if the facts are on your side, bang in the facts. If the law is on your side, bang in the law. If neither's on your side, keep banging. So
there we go.
So let's get into it, Sheldon.
All right.
But here's my question. First of all, why would anyone start an IRB right now? Isn't this like a market that's flooded, that already has 2 dominant players? Like, why start now?
Oh, you are asking the $1 million question. And the answer to that is, when you have a market concentration like we have in the private IRB sector right now, in the commercial IRB sector, and I can get into data and all the stuff around that, you have a duopoly, right? And that eventually is going to impact who gets clinical research, which is a total violation of the concept of justice in the Belmont Report. So what we're doing is we are creating an IRB so that sponsors and hospitals have a choice, and so that there is an alternative out there. The market concentration for commercial IRBs, the concentration in this market is profound. There is, if you look at revenue as a indicator of market share, the 2 big players have 85% of the market, and that's a lot. That would be monopolistic. So you look at something else besides revenue, which is called an HHI score, which is, again, a very dry calculated score. The HHI score in the IRB sector is so high that in any other sector, the Department of Justice or the FTC would come in and apply antitrust regulations. But they haven't done it because nobody knows really what we do. We're kind of under the radar.
What is an HHI score, though?
Oh, you're asking me specifically what that is. It is a sum squared of market concentration, and I can't remember specifically what HHI stands for. I want to say Hirschfeld something index.
I mean, that's exactly what I thought, but what does it actually do?
Well, it provides a score, a quantifiable score to talk about how open a market is, right? I mean, how easily can people do business in the market without undue influence of one company or another? And the scores are ranged from no market concentration to lightly concentrated to heavily concentrated. And the scores for the IRB sector fall into the heavily concentrated area, right? And in fact, there is not another. The acquisitions and stuff that have happened in this sector have created an environment that is really anti-competitive. And that's the challenge. And that's why we're in the space, because we want to create a choice.
I mean, I love the idea from a pure justice standpoint and fairness standpoint. I love the idea. Can you still hear me okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I love the idea that there'll be a player out there that's looking to provide that justice, if you will, as we continue. But how do you become the anti-establishment IRB?
I wouldn't say necessarily we're the anti-establishment IRB. I mean, but we are an opportunity. We do this by providing quality delivery, therapeutic expertise, and basically giving people exceptional and exemplary customer service. So that would be the trifecta. And once we have a track record, we'll be gaining market share, we do believe.
Very, very cool. So we've now established that there's a need.
Right.
We've now established that there's a path.
Right.
So my question for you is, how do you start? How do you go, I want to create the next IRB. Here's where we start. It's sort of like eating an elephant.
One bite at a time. You do it one step at a time, right?
So go ahead.
Well, I mean, you start with a clean sheet of paper. I mean, there are certain things you have to have in place, right? You have to have your roster of members, which have to be at least 5 people of varying backgrounds and genders with sufficient experience to review the research that's coming across your path. See, I can quote this. It's very scary. You need to file for your registration with the OHRP. You need to file your registration with the FDA. You need to develop SOPs. You need to develop training programs. You just do it. You do it one step at a time, and all of a sudden, in a matter of weeks or months, you've got your IRB set up, right? And you partner with the right people, and Sotero is very fortunate to be partnered with some amazing people that provide the support and open the doors for us in ways that are going to be beneficial for the research stakeholders and for the company. So I'm excited about that. It'll be fun.
So one of the things, I mean, I end up talking to a lot of sites, and I end up talking to a lot of sponsors,
right?
And CROs. But the point being, overall, that everyone keeps talking about how there is a need for better communication between the different players. Oddly enough, IRBs are probably best set to enable. I'd say IRBs and maybe CROs are set up to enable those conversations. Right. Do you feel like the IRB role needs to evolve to enable those conversations more, or is the role of the IRB to play the umpire and call the balls and call the shots and go, this is how I win?
Well, that's a good question. And I would say maybe. It depends. How's that for a lawyerly answer? Because the IRB... What's that?
Lawyers never give that answer at all. It depends on everything we go with.
Never. I think the IRB itself has got to stay clear of a conflict of interest, right? I mean, that's what's prompting the whole investigation from the GAO into WCG and Advara, right? Is the fact there's a perceived conflict of interest. So you have to keep the body that's deciding whether or not to approve research kind of insulated from the business side of the house. That being said, that doesn't mean you cannot have a larger conversation about how to handle and facilitate communication between the different players and the different stakeholders. And that can be happening with the IRB and HRPP administration, for example, like the director or the vice president of research services, like me or something. Anyway, that is someone who can facilitate the conversation between the different parties. I think it's critical that, because IRBs are kind of the keystone between the sponsors and the sites, right? I mean, that's sort of, without the IRBs, there's nothing there, right? IRBs play an important but unrecognized role, and maintaining those clear swim lanes between what you can and can't do or shouldn't do in terms of an ethical breach will be critical. But that being said, yes, I agree that the larger organization that's operating the IRB can facilitate those communication opportunities.
So you mentioned the Geo analysis, if you will. Do you want to talk a little bit about what happened there, what's going on there, just to give people some context?
Oh, sure. In November of 2019, Senators Warren, Brown, and Sherrod wrote a letter to WCG and Advara asking for data, and very specific data, about how their IRB operated. They wanted SOPs, they wanted numbers of studies that had been turned down. I mean, all of this information is public record, so I'm not talking out of school. WCG and Advara kind of sort of responded, but not sufficiently enough. So senators asked again. They said, we need more information. I mean, WCG responded with the 2-page letter, which was kind of like, Advara provided much more robust information, but still, that was insufficient and wasn't what the senators were asking for. So then they approached the GAO and they said, all right, we would like for you to investigate the for-profit IRB sector. Now, this is important to think about because this is the second investigation in 10 years into this sector. The first investigation had rather disastrous results for an IRB called Coast IRB. But that investigation, the current investigation, is still happening to the best of my knowledge. It hasn't been terminated, and there's been a report released. I mean, there have been some other things which have popped up, I think, that they've needed to look at in terms of investigations. But it's going to have a profound impact on whether or not, on what commercial IRBs can do. So there's a school of thought. Some folks say that there's a possibility that the IRBs will go the way of AT&T. There's another school of thought that says, well, no, the federal government's going to change the regulations to let academic IRBs only be the IRB of record, but neither one of those are really the best alternatives. So we'll see what happens.
So what was the basis of the concerns? I mean, obviously they responded and you gave sort of a general overall play-by-play, but for those people in clinical research, because they might be listening in right now, right, what are they seeing that they should be aware of? They're going, these are areas that our senators, our congressmen, congresspeople are interested in and concern them, and the GAO has sort of looked into.
Fair question. Without actually looking at,
I mean, it's not in front of you. Yeah.
Sponsors have started to do this thing called pay to participate research, for example, right? So you have someone who wants to participate in a clinical research program, but in order to do that, they have to pay for it. And that's, personally, I find that to be an egregious violation of ethics. But there are others who say, well, no, if they want it, they should do it. But it's research, right? And many times you have people in clinical research who are looking for an alternative because traditional treatments have not worked, right? Yeah. So this is becoming kind of a big concern, pay to participate research, right? It's not good.
How is that different from seeding trials, or is that the same thing?
And then what? Sorry? Seeding
trials.
I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay, fair enough. I just didn't know. What else? I guess I've never heard the term "pay to participate," which is why I'm kind of trying to figure out more about it. So can you, maybe I'm just an idiot, but can you re-explain that part to me? Because I didn't understand it.
Sure. Let's say that a pharmaceutical company has a trial
Right.
that is trying a new drug.
Mm-hmm.
And in the traditional way, principal investigator would say, "Oh, I think Jane Doe is a good candidate for this. Let's consent her and get her in the program." And then all of the costs would be borne by the sponsor, and all of the costs would be taken care of unless there was anything else. Right now, there are research protocols which are coming to market, which are like, all right, this is a new drug. If Jane Doe wants to participate, she's going to have to pay $25,000 to do it.
Now I know what you're talking about. Okay, got it. I've never heard that being called paid to participate. Yeah, I've seen that pop up more and more. Usually from a site that's running a single site type of study. So it's almost an investigator-initiated study, but it's interesting. So I see your concerns. So that was one.
Yeah, and another thing is, I mean, there's the Geo investigation is really, there's a concern about private equity investment in IRB spaces, right? Because private equity has a particular goal. And in full disclosure, the company I work for is bankrolled by a private equity company, but we're a little bit different, and that's a whole nother conversation. When you think about what a PI or PE company does, they're about getting a return on investment. And oh my gosh, I mean, as a sidebar here, Advara was sold again recently, right? Mm-hmm. $5 billion is what I heard the sale price was for Advara. I didn't know that.
Interesting.
Yeah, that blows my mind. Whether or not that's accurate, I don't know. I have a reason to believe it is accurate. And another one of the large companies wanted to do an initial public offering, right? So you have a publicly traded company that is going to have an ethical conflict right away because they have to provide a return for their shareholders versus watching out for the ethics of the patient, right? That is an inherent conflict of interest, which is not, you can't overcome that. So those are kind of the things that prompted the investigation to begin with.
Okay. And what do you think about the phenomenon of IRB hopping, which is an IRB?
Every commercial IRB that I have run, the first question we ask sponsors: have you taken this to another IRB, and have they disapproved the study? If they say yes, we don't take it. IRB hopping is bad. It's bad for the science, it's bad for the safety, and it's just bad ethically. That's like, triangulation when you were a kid. Mom, Dad said no. What do you think? I mean, honestly.
So the solution obviously is, and again, I'm just sort of thinking as a lawyer here, but if I know that that's the first question an IRB is going to ask me, I'm going to tell the IRB, do not give me a rejection. If you're not going to approve it, just tell me that you're not going to approve it. Do not give me the letter. Go ahead.
Well, yeah.
How do you combat that? Is what I'm asking.
That's a fair question, and this goes back to the customer service issue that I was talking about earlier. That whenever I've run a commercial IRB or even an IRB in a hospital system, service is really about working with the investigator and making sure that what they bring to the IRB is approvable right out of the gate, right? So we don't send it to the board knowing that it's going to be disapproved, or we don't send it to the board with a high possibility of significant changes, right? I mean, there is nothing wrong with working with the investigator and the sponsor to help them shape up their protocol in such a way that it can get an approval right out of the gate. It's perfectly fine. I've always looked at compliance this way. So the regulations are this box, right? My job is to help you legally and ethically fit your project into this box. That's what I'm supposed to do as a compliance guy. That doesn't mean I'm supposed to bend the rules, which I'm not. It doesn't mean I'm supposed to break the rules, which I'm not. It means working with you to help you understand. So there's a large educational component to that customer service, so that when they come back the next time, say, "Oh, we saw this. We know what we need to do."
So what happens, and this happens often in the legal world, which is you're trying to help people follow the rules, and you realize at some point you're now vested in the outcome because you're part of that educational process.
Right.
And now you go from the one calling the shots to the one playing ball. And how do you draw that distinction?
That is a very good question. And that goes back again to something we talked about earlier, in having the people who make the decisions insulated from the process of helping craft the submission, right? I mean, that being said, there's nothing really wrong with an IRB chair having a conversation with somebody and helping explain what's going on.
Sure.
But that goes back to that inherent conflict of making sure that the people making the decision aren't involved in the customer service or the business development part of that process, right?
Right.
And there are ways to do that. There are ways to build those firewalls.
Very, very cool. So let's talk a little bit more about the role of an IRB. And I know a lot of people, I've actually ended up talking to a lot of people, and IRBs have been of particular interest, as you can imagine. One of my questions is, what is the role of an IRB? When I've always thought of an IRB, the role of an IRB is to follow the FDA guidances and ensure patient safety. That's primarily the focus of the IRB.
Right.
When did the IRB become in charge of, say, patient privacy? Because that's technically governed by the OCR, not by the FDA.
And that's a fair question. There are a couple of things to address in that overall concept, right? One of them is IRB mission creep. IRB mission creep is something which happens, and it kind of happens organically unless you're alert for it. But our regulations state this is the lane we swim in. Now, in terms of privacy, the OCR regulations allow IRBs to become privacy boards. And that's one of the things that the governments allow us to do. So in order to help facilitate the approval of research, many organizations say, all right, rather than sending this through a separate privacy channel, we're going to let the IRB look at the HIPAA authorization and look at the privacy and look at the data security. And that's how that whole thing happened. It was kind of like an attempt to make sure that things were facilitated, but in some cases it backfired. Now, that being said, I've also had clients that have to send it through a separate privacy channel, and that really gums up the gears, right? Because, and I just recently worked with an IRB before I joined Cetero, and the mean turnaround time from the privacy office was almost 2 months. And that is added on top of the time that an IRB has to look at it because they required separate channels.
Right. But let me ask you this question. There is some information out there, some thoughts out there about whether clinical research is even covered by HIPAA. And the reason you get into that is because technically the way HIPAA works is it's between a patient and their provider.
Right.
And if you are a provider, you are there to treat the patient.
Right.
In the context of clinical research, you very clearly tell the subjects that you're not being treated in research.
Right.
So if that is true, are you really subject to HIPAA? And just to be clear, this is neither legal advice, does not represent Cetero. We're sort of having an overall concept.
Right. This is a conversation, a coffee clutch between two friends about how to address this. This is not an official opinion. This is just merely an opinion, right?
Exactly.
Honestly, I think that has happened because so many things. I mean, the IRB touches so many things. Like, let's look at Part 11 compliance, for example.
Yeah.
Right? IRBs now use electronic tracking systems, right? So anytime that PHI is transmitted electronically, you have to be Part 11 compliant, right? So now IRBs have to be Part 11 compliant if they receive PHI, even though it is not in the context of PTO, right?
Yeah.
So people, this creep has I think developed because there's never been clear guidance from the federal government about you don't have to do this or you don't have to do that. And so people are kind of doing the best they can. And that's where I think that fuzziness comes into play many times.
I guess that's true. I guess my question with that is, can you challenge an IRB who says, we don't care that you think so. We're telling you we're going to hold you to HIPAA, even though we're neither required to technically follow that. And I'm just trying to understand the thought process, because two of the organizations control 85% of the market, hence the question.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can certainly challenge that. Think about, though, where a lot of IRBs are located, right? So you've got IRBs in medical colleges or universities with medical schools, right? So there's, again, that enmeshment and that fuzziness. Now, I've also worked at commercial IRBs that make it a point to say, we will not look at HIPAA. That is not our lane. We look only at this. And that has really facilitated turnaround time. It's facilitated investigator communication. But, you know, I think that, again, just an opinion, that it certainly could be challenged because there is no explicit regulation from the government that says X, Y, or Z, right?
So does that make a particular sponsor or a particular site ultra vulnerable to a more vigorous IRB review than if they had just succumbed to what the IRB sees as its scope, if you will? Does that question make sense?
Help me understand a little better.
Okay. If I say no, is the IRB going to be really extra mad at me and look at things a little bit harder?
Oh, no. I mean, not my IRB. You know, I mean, that's just plain mean, right?
Yeah, but people are mean.
Yeah, they are.
Okay, fair enough. We can move on. This was more of a, am I missing something really obvious? And what you pointed out to me is there is, so I'm going to play devil's advocate to my own statement.
Okay.
The devil's advocate position on that is the role of the IRB is to protect patients,
right?
And patient privacy is part of protecting patients. Now the question is that grounded in any federal regulation? I'm not aware of one, but maybe there is. Go ahead.
Sort of. I mean, this is one of those things where, you know, if the IRB acts as a privacy board, and an institution tells the IRB you're the privacy board for this, then all those regulations flip into place, right?
But the institution has to concede that point.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a quagmire.
Right.
But
fair enough. Okay, let's ask a different version of this question.
All right.
Do you think that, again, the point of an IRB is to look out for patient safety, but not just, or more accurately, subject safety? And we can have a whole discussion on subjects versus patients, but that's kind of
yeah. And then there's participant too. So you got subject, patient, participant. Yeah, I mean,
exactly. I keep seeing that over and over again. But ignoring that part of the discussion, who does the IRB owe its duty to in the context of patient, subject, participant? And what I mean by that is the IRB empowered, or should it be empowered, to enforce things like diversity?
You're asking a good question. Well, let's take a step back for a minute and look at the three pillars of what really constitute the Belmont Report, right? Justice is one of those.
Beneficence and
respect for persons.
Thank you. Considering I teach that, I should remember it, but thank you.
So I mean, there is some legislation pending. I mean, you probably have seen the NPRM for the new FDA regulations, right? That are to be harmonizing with the OHRP regulations. That diversity is part of that, right? The question, and back in the day, the questions were on the continuing renewal form, in terms of gender, race, that kind of thing. Then they went away, and now they're probably going to come back. In an ideal world, absolutely, an IRB should say, let's look at what your patient population or what your subject population is, right? But in some places, you're just not going to be able to achieve that as much as you'd like to, right? I mean, think about, I don't know, let's think about someplace like, I don't know, Orange County, California, or Salt Lake City. That is predominantly one demographic, right? You're not going to be able to get a variety.
Yeah.
Like you would in New York City or Los Angeles or Miami.
Correct. So you might not be able to, but that assumes that you're only operating in a single site. Do you think that a study should be designed to have more diversity? I don't mean this from a regulatory standpoint, because there are regulations, there are guidances where the FDA says, we want this. But should the IRB be stepping in saying, we don't owe our duty just to the subjects enrolling into the study, but also to the patients who might be getting this drug in the future, so that your drug represents the needs of all these groups of people?
I think that's a hard question, because my ethicist will say, absolutely, that's what we should do. But my IRB side is like, my practical side is like, no, because our goal is to protect the right safety and welfare of the patients who enroll in the studies. We don't know. In fact, we are really forbidden from looking at what the outcome of the research might produce at some point. I mean, that's explicated in the regulations. Don't consider future impacts of this research. So we have to think about the people who are in the program here and now and today. Man, that's a heartbreaking question. Thanks a lot.
Which I'm gonna flip that question around. Does the answer change if you go from being an IRB to an ethics board?
They're the same thing.
Are they?
Well, I mean, yes. I mean, an REB in Canada, Review Ethics Board, is the same thing as an IRB, Institutional Review Board. I mean, we look at the right safety and welfare. Now, if you're talking about an ethics review board, like say in a hospital, that's something entirely different.
No, I was talking more as you start looking at like European regulations, and you start looking at, I don't specifically know how the regulations play out across the world, but I imagine, based on previous conversations I've had, that the rules do change slightly depending on where you are. And
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for example, even in the United States, the rules change, right? Like age of majority. Age of majority is different in Montana than it is in California.
Sure.
So you've got, the rules globally are different, and the regulatory agencies in charge of those different countries can set the standards. The FDA specifically has not really said you need to do X, Y, and Z.
Right.
And I have opinions as to why that might have happened, but that's for another conversation at another time.
That is. Here's a really simple question. Would that be the role of the FDA to say that, or would that be OHRP or AHRP's role to say something like that?
Well, I mean, it really depends, right? I mean, I don't think that. Let me try to couch this carefully. So I'm looking at this from an FDA specific point of view, because drugs and devices are FDA regulated, and OHRP and AHRP have no guidance, no bearing really on drugs or devices, right? I think the FDA could say, make a best faith effort to do X, Y, and Z, right, and document your best faith effort. Boom, boom, boom.
Yeah.
But I don't know that they've done that.
No, I'm not aware that they have. I haven't looked at the last version of the guidance that they put out. I just didn't know how that gets controlled and regulated. We can literally keep going, but we're literally 15 minutes past time. So this was such a fun conversation. But Parker, This was amazing. Here's a question for you. Any last parting words?
Be kind.
Oh, I like that one. The last person who did that didn't do very well, though. That was Ellen.
Oh, scratch that. Be as kind as you can be.
There you go. This was amazing. So thank you again. These conversations are not intended to be legal, regulatory, or clinical advice and may not be right for you. These conversations are intended for educational purposes only. Conversations on this forum do not create an attorney-client relationship.